Hello everyone, it's Pastor Wagner again. Welcome to my weekly video blog. I took off last week for Thanksgiving. I hope you all had a good Thanksgiving. Today I'd like to talk about being a nonconformist. And I want to go to, first of all, to Romans 12 and verse 1, and then verse 2 later on. This will be the base text. Romans 12:1 says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that ye present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. The number one thing that God is concerned that we sacrifice to Him is ourselves. Lay your body on that altar, on God's altar, and present it as a living sacrifice. We have to live for God, sacrifice ourselves, deny ourselves, and give ourselves wholly to the Lord. Be like Amaziah, who willingly offered himself unto the Lord. 2 Chronicles 17 and verse 16. Willingly offer yourself. Present your body as a living sacrifice. The Lord is looking for those who will worship Him in spirit and in truth, who will set everything else aside and just follow the truth. You don't need and you should not love this world. That's one thing. We all want to love the world. We all want the world to love us. We all want to do things like the world and please the world. But you know what God says? 1 John 2:15, love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. If you want God to love you, make sure you don't love the world. If you love the world, that's a surefire way to make sure that God doesn't love you. You can't love the world. We can't do things like the world does. We need to reject the way that the world does things and do things God's way. James said in James 4:4, know ye not that friendship of the world is the friendship of the world is enmity with God. Whosoever therefore will be a friend of the world is the enemy of God. That's a sobering text. If you are a friend of the world, you are an enemy of God, and God is going to be an enemy of you. We cannot love the world. We cannot be conformed to this world. We need to learn to be viewed as weird by the world, and don't worry about it. Don't worry about if the world looks at you and thinks that you're a weirdo because you don't do things like they do, if you don't walk lockstep with how they do it. Don't worry about it. Peter said, and this is interesting, that this was going on way back 2,000 years ago. Nothing has changed. It happened to the apostles, it happened to the early Christians, and it'll happen to us. Peter said, for the time past of our life may suffice us to have wrought the will of the Gentiles, when we walked in lasciviousness, lusts, excess of wine, revelings, banquetings, and abominable idolatries. Kind of sounds like a Christmas party, doesn't it? An office Christmas party. Or maybe a frat party back when you were in college. Wherein they think it strange that ye run not with them to the same excess of riot, speaking evil of you. They think it's weird when a person gets converted to Christianity and they turn from all of that wickedness and all that sin and all the partying and reveling and abominable idolatries and all those kind of things. People think you're pretty weird. They look at you and say, well, that guy's strange. He's not running with us anymore. He's not doing what he used to do. They think it's weird, and then they speak evil of you, and then they start to call you names. But you know what? You need to learn to love that. Love it when people speak evil of you for Christ's sake, when they call you names, when they don't want to run with you anymore. Be happy when you're evil spoken of. You remember what Jesus said on the Sermon on the Mount? He said, blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are ye when men shall revile you and persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you falsely for my sake. Rejoice and be exceeding glad, for great is your reward in heaven, for so persecuted they the prophets which were before you. When men speak evil of you and revile you for Christ's sake, because you've done righteousness, rejoice. Be thankful and be happy, because they did it to Christ, they did it to the apostles, they did it to the prophets before them. They've always done it. So when people think that you're strange because you don't do what they do, or you hold different opinions than they do, rejoice. Be thankful for it. We all need to learn to be nonconformists. See, some people shy away from this. They don't want to be. They just want to kind of go with the crowd, and they don't want to look different. They don't want to be different. They don't want to hold different opinions. They want just to kind of be like everybody else, and that way they'll fit in, and they won't feel ashamed. They won't be put out. They won't be on the outskirts, the outcasts of society. But look at what Paul says here when he continues in Romans 12:2. He said, "And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Don't be conformed. Don't allow this world to mold you so that you look just like them. Be different. Be different. Don't follow the crowds. You don't have to have the latest fashion, right? You don't have to go into debt like the world goes into debt. Don't feel like, oh, I need to keep up with the Joneses. I need to have the big house like they do. Oh, I need to have a new car. I wouldn't want to look like some kind of a goofball running around in an old clunker. I need to have a new car. Don't, oh, I can't afford it, but it doesn't matter. I need to put it on the card. I need to take out the loan. I don't want to look like a weirdo. Don't worry about looking like a weirdo. Who cares about driving an old car? Who cares if you don't have the latest clothes? Who cares if you're not wearing the clothes that show off your cleavage, or mini skirts that show way too much of your thighs and all that kind of stuff, make you look like some kind of a hooker or something? Don't worry about it. If that's what the world's doing. Don't think that you need to do that. You don't. You don't have to be like they do. Learn to be a contrarian when it comes to religion. Don't worry about it if you don't go to the biggest church. You don't have to go to one of those mega churches, where they have the rock bands and all that kind of stuff. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it if you're a member of a true and faithful little independent church, a little Baptistic church, a historic church. Don't worry about it. That's, you know what? That's where the saints have always been. They didn't follow the crowds. They weren't in the Roman Catholic monstrosity all those years. They didn't do that kind of thing. So don't worry about it. Jesus said, "Fear not, little flock. It's your Father's good pleasure to give unto you the kingdom." Don't worry about it if you're in the minority. Don't worry about it if you're not conformed to this world in politics. Maybe you don't subscribe to being a Republican or a Demopublican. Don't worry about it. Maybe you don't fall in the party lines. Maybe you don't buy all the media's garbage about how these two parties are so different and you have to fall in one or the other. There are more than two choices in most everything. The devil always loves to give you either two choices and they're both bad, but there's usually more. Don't worry about it. Maybe if you don't buy into all the mainstream medicine that's out there. Don't feel bad if you don't always take your doctor's advice. Maybe if your cholesterol is at 201 and he wants to put you on statin drugs, maybe you don't want to go on statin drugs. Maybe you don't think that's a good idea. Don't feel weird about it. And if you want to, fine. I'm not telling you what to do, and I'm not saying that you have to do these examples that I'm mentioning to be a Christian, but if you have a different opinion, don't worry about it. Don't feel like you have to follow the world just because they're doing it. Maybe you don't like to eat this frankenfood. Maybe you don't think Monsanto is the best thing since sliced bread. Maybe you don't think all this GMO food's a good idea. Don't worry about it. Maybe you're in the minority. Someday you'll probably be in the majority. The world will eventually catch up. But you know what? Don't worry about it. You don't have to be like them. Don't worry about it if you don't watch the mainstream media. Maybe you don't get all your news from Fox News or MSNBC or CNN. Yeah, maybe you go to alternative news sources. That's okay. You don't have to be like them. You don't have to get your news from these government propaganda outlets that's just going to fill your mind with garbage. Don't worry about it if you're not toeing the line when it comes to economics. Maybe you don't believe in this Keynesian stuff. Maybe you don't believe it's a good idea for the government to run continual deficits, and maybe you don't think it's a good idea that the Fed is printing up money to the tune of $1,000 billion a year, $1 trillion a year. Maybe you don't think that's a good idea. Don't worry about it if you're going against the mainstream. Yeah, maybe Keynesianism is taught in virtually every university. Maybe we're all Keynesians, as Richard Nixon said. But don't worry about it maybe if you don't buy into that nonsense. Don't worry about it if you're not following the investment advice of Wall Street. You watch MSNBC, it'll get in the stock market. The stock market's at all-time highs. Maybe you don't want to jump in at the top and be the sucker that buys when everybody else is getting ready to sell. I don't know if it's the top or not. I'm just saying, maybe if you don't want to follow the mainstream advice, don't worry about it. Maybe you don't want to follow the current foreign policy of the last, say, 10 or 15 years. Maybe you don't think it's a good idea that we should be over there bombing countries on the other side of the world that have done us no harm. Maybe it's not a good idea to starve 500,000 children in Iraq like we did in the 90s. Maybe it's not a good idea to attack a country like Iraq that never attacked us. Maybe it's not a good idea to be in Afghanistan for 12 years Maybe it's not a good idea to spend trillions of dollars on these wars. Don't feel like you have to toe the neocon line and feel like you're un-American if you don't support this stuff. Maybe it's actually not a good idea that we murder people on the other side of the globe that have done us no harm. Don't feel bad if you're holding a contrary opinion to that. Just stand for what you believe is the truth. You don't have to follow what everybody else does. You don't even have to believe official stories. Maybe you don't believe that Lee Harvey Oswald single-handedly killed JFK. The anniversary of it was just a week or two ago. Maybe you don't believe the official story. Maybe there's more to the story than the government's telling you. Don't feel bad if you don't believe the story. Maybe you don't believe that 19 hijackers with box cutters managed to outsmart the most powerful nation and the most powerful security in the world and managed to implode 3 skyscrapers with 2 airplanes and some jet fuel. Maybe you don't believe that crazy story. Maybe you don't believe that buildings just fall down on their own like building number 7 did. Go Google it if you don't know what I'm talking about. Maybe you don't, but don't worry about it. You don't have to toe the line. You don't have to be conformed to this world and believe everything that you're told. Learn to question things. Learn to view things in light of the scripture. I'm not saying that you have to believe these things that I just listed off to not be conformed to the world. But if you don't toe the line, don't feel bad about it. That's what I'm trying to tell you. Ultimately, we need to be conformed to God and to His Word. So take everything that you see or everything that you hear and you compare it with what the Scripture says. And most importantly, you be conformed to God in His Word when it comes to His holy religion, and you let everything in your life be guided and sifted through that Scripture. And you know what? Let the chips fall where they may. And if you happen to come out on the opposite side of the majority of the world on various things, that's okay. You know what? The majority of the world was not inside the ark whenever the flood came. The slight minority was inside the ark. So don't worry about it if you're not conformed to this world. Be not conformed, be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So anyway, this might have been a little bit longer than usual. But thank you for your kind and patient attention, and I'll see you again next week. Bye for now.